you can get away without missing out. Whether you're traveling across Idaho or just spending more time outside, the Connector keeps you up to date with the local stories that matter, from wildfire season to community news. Stay connected to Idaho with the Connector, Idaho Daily News. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. Cyanide bombs are back. They're known as M44s, and they're a small spring-loaded device full of sodium cyanide. Trappers smear bait on the bombs, and when a coyote or a fox touches them, they explode, releasing a spray of deadly particles. They're designed to kill predators that prey on cattle. 9 years ago, 14-year-old Canyon Mansfield was playing behind his house in Pocatello with his dog Casey when he came across an M44, which exploded in his face, covering them both with the deadly poison. Casey died. Canyon was left with weeks of nausea, vomiting, and headaches. 3 years ago, after years of public outcry, the U.S. Department of the Interior banned their use. But in April, the federal government quietly brought them back on a limited basis. Canyon's family has been telling his story for years now, and they're back, along with groups like Predator Defense, campaigning to get those cyanide bombs banned again. There's even legislation called Canyon's Law that supporters are trying to get through Congress. Canyon's dad, Dr. Mark Mansfield, and his sister Madison are joining us now, along with Brooks Fay, the executive director of Predator Defense, which is a national wildlife advocacy organization. I want to thank all of you for being here today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
And Mark, let me start our conversation off with you today. Can you tell us what happened to Canyon and Casey? Take us back to that time in 2017. I mean, how did Canyon find that device?
Your story was pretty accurate, but he was actually homesick with just a simple respiratory infection, and he decided he would go outside and get some fresh air to try and feel better. And behind our house is a hill that he often would go up and sit and read and play at the top of the hill. And he did so, but unusually that day he found a shiny looking device that any kid would look at, and he bent forward as our dog was hilled in front of him and facing him with a toy in his mouth. Between them was this device. He touched it, it went off, and it, as you said, sprayed cyanide into their faces. He immediately rushed over to the snow because it was spring. It was in March of 2017. He went to the snow and rubbed it on his face and tried to clean his face. And when he looked back over, he saw Casey, who was writhing and foaming from the face. And he succumbed to the cyanide poisoning at that moment in front of Canyon's face.
Oh,
yeah.
Can you tell us, Mark, did you have any idea at that time that these cyanide bombs were right behind your house?
No, I wasn't notified, and I had no idea that such things existed. You know, I've been an outdoorsman my entire life and spent so many much of my life on public grounds, and never had any idea that these things existed. In fact, we called the hazmat and the sheriffs, and everybody came out, and there were many people running around this mountain, and they've in fact found another one placed about 20 yards from the first one that Canyon had set off. And they didn't know what it was, and these are trained people for these types of things, and they didn't even know that things existed. And we started sending pictures around, and we were figuring it out. I was down at the house, they were up the hill, and we started sending pictures around trying to figure it out. And it was actually an ex-government wildlife services animal damage control hunter who notified the sheriffs what it was. And then, of course, once they figured it out, they said, "Oh gosh, this is cyanide. You guys need to get to the hospital."
Madison, how old were you when this happened, and what do you remember about this?
Yeah, so I was around 21 at that time, and I remember my grandma calling me and telling me that some sort of bomb had gone off at my house,
Oh,
which probably isn't the best way to phrase that.
yeah.
But I was in Sun Valley with some friends at the time, and I remember speeding home and just having no idea what was going on. And my entire family was at the hospital at that time. Um, and they had the bomb squad was at our house, basically segregating everybody from the area. And we weren't allowed to touch the clothing, we weren't allowed to touch our dog. So it was definitely a very scary experience, but I think it definitely highlights, the consequences of these devices. Unfortunately,
Hmm.
it happened to our family, but this is something that is that children, hikers, pet owners can be unintentionally exposed to. And so, on the good end of things, my family has been able to advocate along with these organizations like Predator Defense and speak out against placing these devices on public lands.
Brooks, let me bring you into the conversation because Canyon Story, unfortunately, is not an isolated one. Can you tell us how often people or pets come across these devices?
Well, I mean, up until this incident, a lot. And or I think that this specific case was really a pivotal point, but that we got calls on a regular basis predominantly throughout the West, of people who lost dogs to M44 cyanide bombs. And unfortunately, what makes the Manfield case so extraordinary is that a lot of the victims that we deal with are extraordinarily apprehensive in speaking out because they live in rural communities, often the same communities that the trapper lives in. Their kids go to school with the trapper's kids, these types of things. These issues can become highly political about lethal predator control in Western landscapes. But in the Madison, with the Mansfield case, again, Canyon and his family were really extraordinary. I asked them whether or not they would be willing to come to Washington, D.C. with me in
Hmm.
2017, just weeks after the incident, to help push for legislation, Canyon's law, that would ban M44s on public lands. And they agreed. And they also returned back with us back in 2019. So they have been extraordinary in following through and helping us trying to basically rid the landscape of these horrific devices.
Hmm. And Brooks, how do these devices work? I mean, what are they supposed to do exactly?
Well, they're predominantly used for, you mentioned that they're for protecting cattle. It's
Hmm.
actually sheep ranchers who like having M44s, or Wildlife Services mainly uses them for sheep ranching. Of course, they can be used for, predation around cattle too, but they're essentially set out. They're rather, inconsequential looking. It looks like a sprinkler head sticking up out of the ground. The top of them is wrapped with what called Coban tape, vet wrap. It's a very absorbent, spongy tape that soaks in the scent that is spread on top of it. And coyotes and wolves and a lot of other wild animals are, and including dogs, domestic animals, are attracted to scent. And
Mm.
so they investigate, and oftentimes they're designed for the animal to pull up on it, and which time it releases the sodium cyanide particles. And then it ejects up into their face, their eyes, mucous membranes, their nostrils, so forth. And then it can take 10 to 15 minutes for the animal to die. But we've had a case where a dog in Oregon pulled on an M44 and it took 8 hours for the dog to die. So it all depends. Animals that pull up on these devices don't necessarily die quickly. The death is
Hmm.
extraordinarily painful. And
Mm.
for people who have witnessed this, such as Kenya did, it's an incredibly traumatic thing to witness. It's very violent and extraordinarily disturbing. But
Mm.
again, they're predominantly used on Western landscapes. And in 2017, along with Western Watersheds Project, and they filed, and we joined them on what was called Administrative Procedures Act petition to stop using them in Idaho. That was accepted, and then 3 years later, in 2020, through litigation that we were involved in with some of those same organizations, Idaho will no longer permit M44s from being used until the Idaho Wildlife Services completes a complete environmental impact statement regarding their activities in killing wolves. And part of that agreement is to not use M44s on the landscape.
Mm.
We still think they're a few years away from completing that. And so right now they're still illegal to use in Idaho. In 2019, we banned M44s through the Oregon legislature. So they're no longer allowed to be used in Oregon and in California either. Recently, we've been in touch with Wildlife Services in Oregon and California. They're going to abide, they've agreed to stand by the ban in those states, and they're not going to be using them on BLM land, but we're going to be monitoring that situation very closely. We've also been in touch with the regional director of Wildlife Services in the Western United States, and that was several weeks ago, and they're going to be getting back to us on whether or not where they're going to be using them. But this idea that they're going to be used sparingly, uh,
Mm.
we've heard this story before. And one of the things that Wildlife Services often refers to is the signage. And the signage is really kind of it's a red herring. Uh, I can't tell you how many times where there's no warning signs on these devices, and that separate from that, we know that Wildlife Services trappers, and I've heard from several former trappers in the recent weeks, don't want to use them. They're petrified of getting a phone call, just like what happened with Kenya Mansfield, that they're going to wake up one morning and discover their M44 killed a child or somebody's dog.
Mm.
So even the agency, even trappers within the agency don't want to use these devices anymore.
So then, Brooks, why? I mean, here, if I'm understanding this properly, is that these were banned and then quietly brought back recently. W- With everything you just laid out, why would these be allowed to be an option?
It's nonsensical. If you look at what this administration is doing in regards to rolling back regulations and safeguards to the public, it kind of we actually expected this to happen. And so I believe it's driven by a small minority of people, very vocal. And a lot of times in the West, it's county commissioners that are politically connected, that they also happen to be sheep ranchers. And that's kind of a small part of it, but it's politically driven because even a lot of the ranchers that we speak to have invested heavily in livestock guarding dogs. Now they're going to be afraid to basically use those dogs for fear that they're going to get poisoned. And then we also have the fact that the public is under the assumption that they have been banned from BLM lands. Well, the fact that BLM covered up that they were bringing them back, this was not announced on their website. This was information that I spent months digging for. And that basically, other than the press that we've created from this, nobody knows about it.
Hmm.
Many people in the West are under the impression that they can go on BLM land now with their dogs and their children and everything will be okay. And of course, nothing could be further from the truth. We don't know whether or not they've been deployed yet, but that, again, under the circumstances of what we're seeing from this administration, anything's possible.
Mark, when you found out about this, walk us through how you felt knowing that these devices had been brought back, even sparingly.
When the BLM agreed to not use them on any public grounds, I was ecstatic originally, and Brooks did warn me that we need to keep our eye on it, that it wouldn't last, and turned out that with his experience, he was right. Uh, I guess I wasn't shocked, and that's why I knew, and I've always known that ultimately, unless Canyon's law gets passed, this is going to go back and forth forever, and it depends
Hmm.
on who's in what mood. Until
I
Canyon's
want
law
to
is
get to.
passed. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say I want to get to Canyon's Law in a minute, but what I would like you to talk about as well is and how sick did Canyon get? I mean, unfortunately, your dog died that day, and it sounded like an excruciating death, Mark. But is there treatment for cyanide poisoning? I mean, how did this impact Canyon?
Yeah, so there's not a lot of data on sublethal doses. Most time it either kills you or it doesn't. But
Hmm.
there's not a lot of human data on sublethal doses because in the use of cyanide, we can go way back to World War II, and we don't want to go there, but it's horrific. He had 6 weeks of being up almost every night with headaches and numb arms and vomiting, and it was just not only physically but mentally. And then really, I think as the physical improved over time from the initial insult, then we had to deal with the aftermath of the mental anguish.
How is he doing today? I mean, I know it's been 9 years, but I mean, this was such a traumatic event.
Yeah, he's doing great. I think part of our fight for this helped him because you can be a victim or you can be an advocate, and we turned our energies that way, and as did he. And now he just returned. He's doing great. He's goes to the University of Utah. He's healthy. He just returned from a 2 month internship where he has been doing cinematography and writing stories about the people of the Himalayas in India. So he's thriving, but he's also still very much involved in advocacy against
Hmm.
the cyanide bombs.
So, Mark, let's talk about Canyon's Law, because you have been advocating for this. If passed, what would it do?
Essentially, it would ban M44 deployment cyanide bombs on all federal public lands. And then that would essentially be it. But unfortunately, we just haven't seen, we're not getting the movement that we need to right
Mhm.
now. I've been involved in this issue, pushing for banning of these devices since 1990, since the organization was founded. And that in the early years, working with Congressman DeFazio, we had actually sometimes bipartisan support. With the last few bills that have been introduced, it's almost exclusively just Democratic support, and it's a shame because this is really a bipartisan issue, and that, but we're we're hoping that by, after, it depends on how things roll out in the midterms and by next year of having the bill introduced again and to where we can actually get some movement on it. And I think that's eventually going to happen. This is to bring these devices back is just it's insanity. We know how dangerous they are. We know wildlife services, the signage thing again is that they put signs up is a red herring, and then half the times they don't put signs up because they don't want people to know the devices are in the area. And we've had many poisonings where there's been no signage whatsoever. Again, with the Canyons law, it would ban them on BLM land and on Forest Service lands. So this
Mhm.
would be an extraordinary step forward. I really believe this is going to happen. It's just a matter of time now. And hopefully what we're witnessing right now is just a hiccup.
Brooks, I only have about 2 minutes left. But back in 2017, even the sheriff in Pocatello didn't know about these or that they were even in his county. So, how can people find out where these devices are so they can avoid them? I mean, is there a way to find out?
No. And that technically Wildlife Services notifies the BLM that they're going to be in the area, but they don't give them exact coordinates. Again, this gets back to the issue. Wildlife Services doesn't want people knowing where they are. And their rationale, I'm talking about the trappers, not the state directors. But their rationale behind it, and the state directors, is they don't want people going out and messing with the devices. And so
They put it 300 yards from our house, and they didn't tell us.
And that's
Yeah.
not extraordinary. We've seen many cases where they've been actually put on private land without notifying the owners of the property, and where their dogs have been poisoned. And each time, the Wildlife Services either completely ignores the people, which has successfully done over the decades by not even responding to the complaint, or they'll say, well, we've learned from this, we're going to put up signs. Again, the signs don't mean anything if you're an endangered species or a child. And then there's also the aspect that, vandalism, if people see the signs, they're going to go investigate. It's just these devices, the very idea of them is insane. This is one of the deadliest poisons on earth. And the fact that they're laying across the American landscape, the Western landscape, that they will be like little mines ready to go off the moment something pulls up on them very gently, it really meets the definition of insanity. And it's very upsetting that we're seeing this rollback. But we're not taking it laying down. And again, looking toward the future, I think it's just a matter of time before we have a public lands ban, before Canyons Law does pass. And that's certainly the way we're approaching it. We're just doubling down, and we want to make the public aware of these devices. Because I'll tell you, Wildlife Services and the BLM hasn't made any public statement about this whatsoever. And so they're kind of waiting to see how this plays out. Meanwhile, we're trying to bring as much attention to this issue as possible.
Well, I want to thank all of you for joining us today, and to continue to tell Canyon's story, to actually make many of us aware of this. We've been speaking with Dr. Mark Mansfield. His son Canyon and their dog were poisoned by an M44 device behind their home in Pocatello, along with Canyon's sister Madison. She joined us today as well, and Brooks Fay, the executive director of Predator Defense. We've been talking about how these cyanide bombs are being used again in the West. You've been listening to the Idaho Matters podcast from Boise State Public Radio. To stay in touch, you can find quick Idaho daily news every morning when you subscribe to the Connector podcast. Just by listening, you're helping to support public radio right here in Idaho. And I want to say a big thank you for that.
Each story you hear on Planet Money starts with a question. What happens if we refund tariffs? Why are groceries so expensive? At NPR, we stand for your right to be curious, because the forces shaping our world can be hard to see. Follow NPR's Planet Money wherever you get your podcasts and start seeing how the economy really works.